You are explaining yourself to people who aren't building anything, defending your decisions to people who haven't made any, sharing your plans with people who will forget them by Thursday and remember them only if you fail. Every word you spend doing that is a word that didn't go into the work. 6 months of silence is not 6 months of isolation. It is 6 months of stopping the outward leak, the energy that drains sideways into managing other people's perception of you, and redirecting every drop of it into the thing you are actually trying to build. 6 months. No announcements, no updates, no content about the process, just the process. What arrives on the other side of that is not the life you describe to people. It is the life you built while you stopped describing it. Tony Stark's most important work never happened in public. The suits that mattered, the ones that changed everything, were built alone in a workshop at 3 a.m. with the door closed and no audience except the work itself. The press conference came after. The results came after. The building happened in the silence before any of it. 6 months of your life, redirected the same way, is what this video is about. And what it requires is not what you think. Silence is not the absence of activity. It is the presence of undivided energy. Every time you share what you are building before it is built, something happens that most people never notice because it feels like progress. The response, the encouragement, the interest, the reaction triggers the same internal sense of completion that finishing the work would trigger. The brain registers it as a small reward. The motivation that was stored for the work gets partially discharged into the conversation about the work, and the next session begins slightly less fueled than the previous one, for a reason you cannot identify because it didn't happen at the desk. This compounds quietly across weeks. The man who announces his plans in January and discusses his progress in February and shares his setbacks in March is a man who has been partially spending his motivation on the narration of the work, rather than the work itself. The man who says nothing until December is a man who kept every unit of that fuel inside the engine for 6 months. The output difference between those two men at the end of the year is not small. It is not even in the same conversation. Stark understood this instinctively, not philosophically, practically. The workshop had a door. The door closed. The work happened behind it. What emerged from the other side of that door was not a plan, not a vision board, not an update, a finished thing. That is the product of 6 months of silence. A finished thing, built with every unit of energy that would otherwise have leaked into the performance of building it. The hardest part of going silent is not discipline. It is the discomfort of being unknown in the process. When you stop sharing, the people around you stop tracking you. They stop asking, the interest fades. You become, for 6 months, a man who is not producing visible output because the visible output is the work itself, and the work is not finished yet. There is no update to give because the only update is still building, and that update, repeated across 6 months to no audience, will feel at various points like invisibility, like irrelevance, like falling behind while everyone else moves. Stay with this, because the next part is the exact mechanism by which that feeling of invisibility is the proof that the 6 months is working, not the sign that it isn't. The discomfort of being untracked is the friction that selection produces. Most people cannot tolerate 6 months of building without external validation. They reintroduce the sharing, the subtle update, the vague post, the hint at what is coming, because the silence becomes intolerable before the work becomes finished. The man who can sit inside that discomfort and keep building anyway is not more disciplined than the man who can't. He has simply understood that the discomfort is not a warning signal. It is the cost of admission. Every week of uncomfortable silence is a week the work received energy that the narration didn't consume. 6 months of that is a year's worth of undivided fuel applied to a single direction. What that builds cannot be matched by any amount of motivated, public, validation-sustained effort applied to the same goal. At 6 months, two things are true simultaneously. First, the work is further along than it would have been under any other conditions, because it received every unit of available energy for 180 days without a single leak. Second, the man doing the work has changed in a way that is difficult to articulate but impossible to miss. He has spent 6 months proving to himself, in private, without external confirmation, that he can build without an audience. That proof does not evaporate when the 6 months ends. It becomes the foundation of every decision he makes afterward. Because a man who knows he can work in silence is a man who no longer needs the noise to start. Stark's confidence was never about what other people thought of his work. It was built in the workshop, in the failed iterations nobody saw. In the 3 a.m. sessions that produced nothing usable. In the slow accumulation of a man who knew, from direct private experience, exactly what he was capable of, because he had spent years testing it alone. 6 months gives you the beginning of that knowledge. And the beginning is enough to change everything downstream. You came into this thinking the 6 months was about what you would build. The project, the body, the skill, the goal at the end of the timeline. The primary product of 6 months of silence is not the thing you build. It is the man who built it, the version of you that exists at the end of 6 months of quiet, undivided, unnarrated work is categorically different from the version that started, not because of what was accomplished, but because of what was proven. You proved to the only audience that matters that you can build without permission, without validation, without anyone watching, without the performance of effort standing in for the effort itself. That proof is the life change. Everything else, the results, the progress, the visible output, is just evidence of it. Tonight, identify the one thing you have been building out loud that deserves to be built in silence. The project you keep discussing instead of completing. The goal you keep announcing instead of pursuing. The version of yourself you keep describing to people instead of becoming. Close the loop on the narration. Not permanently, for 6 months. No updates. No hints. No posts about the process. The work gets every conversation you would have had about it. The work gets every unit of energy that would have gone into managing other people's perception of it. The work gets 6 months of you, undivided, with the door closed. Stark didn't ask permission to build the Iron Man suit. He didn't crowdsource the design. He didn't post updates from the workshop. He closed the door and built the thing. And the thing spoke for itself when it was finished, in a way that no amount of talking about it ever could have. The life that changes in 6 months of silence was always possible. You were just spending the energy it required on explaining it to people instead of building it. 6 months, one direction, no narration. Close this video and close the loop. The door is the first decision. Everything after it is just work. One question. What is the one thing you have been talking about building for longer than 6 months without finishing it? Name it in the comments. One line. The act of naming it here, in writing, is the last public word it gets. Everything after this is the work. If this is the video that closes the door, subscribe. No workshop updates required.